obligatory
Recording in progress.
dedicated to the Negro Leagues. And I'll never forget when I read originally that Cool Papa Bell was so fast that when he hit the light switch, he could be under the covers before the lights went out. Or that Josh Gibson was the Black Babe Ruth. Or that Satchel Paige pitched 2,000 games for 400 teams and threw 100 no-hitters and 500 shutouts. I'm just like, it was great reading about Joe DiMaggio and Mickey Mantle and Bob Feller, but those are the stories that stuck with me I was approximately 9 years old. And that's what still sticks with me to this day. So, by the way, I have a ton of visual aids. We can kind of, I'll pick them up as needed, but after this is all said and done, feel free to pour through. I happen to blend. So like any good manager, here's our lineup card. This is everything that we're going to discuss here tonight. So we're going to celebrate the Negro Leagues as a major league. The early baseball history in Richmond, which is of course stylized in 2 words because that was the common 19th century spelling for baseball. Why did the Negro Leagues exist? Why Richmond? And then we're going to discuss actually the Negro League presence here in Richmond, including the first game, famous Negro Leaguers who came to Richmond, Black teams who represented Richmond, and other noteworthy games played here, other cool stories here. So 2020 was a big year for the Negro Leagues. First of all, Major League Baseball did recognize the Negro Leagues as a quote-unquote major league, which it feels like a dramatic oversight. That's because it absolutely was. By Major League Baseball not recognizing the Negro Leagues as a major league, that created almost an impossible path for Negro Leaguers to get inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame, which supports in Cooperstown, New York, which supports the pinnacle of a baseball player's career. And also, even more so than that, the statistical records hadn't been merged. So you have these thousands of ball players who literally couldn't play white Major League Baseball, who were barred not only from the highest honor that someone could achieve, but also from the statistical record. But however, by Major League Baseball declaring the Negro Leagues as a major league, all the statistic records have merged and it's seamless together, and quite frankly, it's beautiful. But there were a lot of folks who kind of thought this is Major League Baseball, this is society kind of bending towards some social commentary that's going on right now, maybe perhaps some political correctness. The time is right, it's the 100-year anniversary. Maybe it's time that we do kind of pay homage to these leagues. But I'm here to tell you that the Negro Leagues were always a major league. And there is some very strong statistical analysis to back this up. For instance, before 1950, Negro League teams went 128 and 115, so they won nearly 53% of their ball games when they played Major League Baseball teams in exhibition play. If you were to kick that down to the minor leagues, which Negro Leagues commonly play minor league teams, they won over 57% of their ball games against minor league baseball teams in exhibition play. That was before integration. Post integration, so Jackie Robinson we'll talk about a number of times tonight. Let's talk about after Jackie crossed the racial barrier of baseball. Once Negro Leaguers reached Major League Baseball, they batted .277 as opposed to .255 by white Major Leaguers. And in AAA, .286 as opposed to .264. So not only are you seeing that they were in many respects superior against full teams, they individually accomplished more. And people are like, well, the pitching wasn't as good in the Negro Leagues. The pitching wasn't as good in the Negro Leagues. I've heard that so many times from people who actually know the leagues well. But former Negro League pitchers struck out more hitters per 9 innings, won a higher percentage of their starts, and had a lower earned run average, a common metric how pitchers are evaluated both at the AAA and the Major League level. So we can kind of put this one to bed. The Negro Leagues have been a major league since their formation. Locally here, I'm very proud of this. I got this idea. First, I wanted just like a full-fledged museum here in Richmond, just dedicated to Negro Leagues and jazz music. That's still like out in left field somewhere. Who knows? We might get there. But this idea of a plaque or a monument kind of sprang up. And fortunately, I was able to find some really supportive people here in the community to help with this and help me fundraise for it. I did all the research and designed it, but the parks, the mayor's office, and a couple of other organizations across the city were very helpful to me. Yes, and this is me posing with it like it's my fourth child. The cement wasn't even in place yet. But this plaque actually commemorates the Negro Leagues here in Richmond, Indiana. And so, picture, you can see Josh Gibson and Cool Papa Bell. So we were like, what's this big blurb at the top? Like, what is that? That's actually Exhibition Park. So a lot of people aren't familiar with the fact that before McBride, which originally was known as Municipal Stadium, there was a whole 2,500 seat baseball field here in Richmond. So some people are wondering, like, why would you put the plaque there? Like, people are just zooming right past, no one's ever going to see it. It was very purposeful because from 1917 to 1935, Exhibition Park played host to no fewer than 14 Negro Leaguers who ultimately became Hall of Famers. And thanks to one of my history buddies here locally, you can see in 1936, unfortunately, the field burned down in 1935. This is, of course, people were learning you shouldn't build baseball parks completely out of wood. So this is a field that 1 year later, and then 4 years later, you can hardly see a trace of it. But now, the present day, the marker actually sits right across from it. So that photograph, so as you're looking at it across the street, just picture this beautiful ballpark there where so many of these teams play. And so that's why the marker is there. So let's start at the very beginning. That's a little bit about like broad view about the Negro Leagues, but let's localize it a little bit in a segment I like to call Mayoral Misgivings, Spirited Students and Roused Roller Skating Royalty, Early Baseball in Richmond, Indiana. When you think early baseball, you got to remember Casey at the bat, the Mudville 9. But this is actually things that I have found since this book was completed, which I'll talk about here in a moment. But the first box score I was able to find was in 1867. And that was an Earlham team versus some team called the Star Club. And if you can't see, the final score was 32-29. The games were a little bit more high scoring back then. There were very few rules, but baseball is interesting in the 19th century. Baseball, although it finds a fervent home on Earlham's campus, baseball is widely regarded as a game for cranks or thieves, criminals, idolaters, drunkards, or even worse in the eyes of many, Irish immigrants. But it's kind of immigrants' game. Yes.
The box score, the T stands for what?
I believe the T stands for tries.
Tries and runs are the other.
Yes. I'm not quite sure how this one's tabulated because I see this adds up. These are the same. And this game is very back and forth fair. But anyway, baseball has this reputation. And it's really gained because at this time, everybody works all day and night. The only time that a family might have for leisure time is on Sunday. So that's when people play their baseball, which people felt a certain way about doing anything on Sunday, much less playing a match game of baseball. So it's not long that local authorities really try to put the kibosh or put the screws on baseball. So the Richmond Weekly Palladium, which was just digitized not too terribly long ago, actually, is kind of your paper in town that covers baseball. Why it's in depth. So they even have some clips, like in April 22nd, 1871, they said you shouldn't play baseball on Sunday unless you can make a house run faster than the police, because the police will chase you. And if they caught you, they'd arrest you. Just a month later, they wrote it takes 10 boys on each side to play baseball here on Sunday. 9 to do the actual playing, the additional boys to look out for the police. This is a perilous thing to do, play baseball. And just a month after that, I don't know, there must have been like a baseball squad amongst the police department, because all of a sudden baseball is breathing its last in the city. And then just a month after that, The baseball disease has nearly left this state, but still clings to Evansville and Fort Wayne, which proud Fort Wayne native, go Fort Wayne. And then 2 years after that, there was reported that there was not a single baseball club in the state of Indiana. It's sort of glad.
Why were they so much against it?
So the best, if you look at the early, if you look at the early history of baseball, it was widely played by Irish and German immigrants, particularly after the American Civil War. And aside from like just having Sundays being just like reserved for no leisure activities, which is when nearly all baseball was played, people had a moral opposition against it for that reason. There was also probably a bit of a nativist movement going on that kind of countered with baseball because of baseball's reputation as being played mostly by immigrants. Yeah, it's kind of wild because not only are the police after him, the mayor's after him too. So our mayor, which by the way, Thomas W. Bennett, as best I can tell, he's the only mayor who's served 3 non-consecutive terms in city history. He did not care for baseball. And by the way, this is not a slight against Thomas W. Bennett as a person. By all means, he was a Union general. He was a man of the regiment in the American Civil War. He was the first provincial governor of Idaho. He was very well accomplished. He did not like baseball. I do know this because every time he caught one of the little boys playing baseball, he'd give him this lecture about one of his good buddies whose beauty, manly grace, and towering intellect were what required his entire family. But how he gradually sank beneath the seductive influence of the deadly game until he went to his grave. A terrible evidence of what baseball will do. Like, man, that is just wild. But not only he would pretty much lecture the child, which if I was a child, that mustache would scare me. So the child would be in tears, and then the child would be fined $5.65, which equates to $163.56 today, which that today is actually 6 months ago, so even more now. So you got the mayor, the police after you, you got the mayor after you, and your one safe haven for baseball across the entire city, my humble alma mater, Earlham College in 1882, the faculty say, baseballers, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Yeah. So now there's actually nowhere to play baseball in the city, and you don't hear any traces of baseball in the local papers for years on end. Baseball had effectively been eradicated from the city, which is still just so wild to think about. It actually took, when I mentioned roller skating royalty, some of you may know automatically where I'm going with this. It actually took local celebrity Macagus C. Henley, who was known as the roller skating king, because in 1885 he wrote the book on roller skating. You can still buy it on Amazon. It's probably terribly antiquated, I imagine, but Macagus C. Henley forms his Henley Baseball Club, and they played all across the tri-state area. And I don't know many of you know much about Henley. He was not shy. He declared his team the state champion of Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky, because all these were very self-ordained at this time. But of note, this exact same year, 1885, probably on the back of Henley forming his team and becoming a little bit more accepted locally here, you actually see the Wayne Colored Baseball Club. They begin play. They played 3 documented games. They went 2-1 before disbanding. So, sorry, I don't know if we have any county folks here, but they beat Centerville and Cambridge City. Yeah. Yes, Mike.
1885, but the Cincinnati team is gone.
Yes.
I mean, that's not too far away, and they're professional, right?
Yes.
They're playing. So why would Indiana eliminate it? Yet right across Cincinnati's got its own great guns.
That's a great question, because yes, the Red Stockings of Cincinnati were formed in 1869, and they jump on a train and they be on for 6 months at a time. They play across the country. It's interesting. Yeah, it's a very interesting cross section, but it was not looked kindly in our state.
But they didn't come here to play that early.
No, the Reds would come several times across the history, across their history, and a couple times even in the 19th century, but not quite this early. So yes, we not only have our first publicly accepted baseball team, we also have our first black baseball team. at this time. We know almost nothing, unfortunately, about the Wayne Color Baseball Club, except that they beat Centerville and Cambridge City. Unfortunately, they're all team. But so you can't talk about baseball in the city without talking about Claude Bear. Okay, Claude plays for the Chicago White Sox. He's known for two things. He actually caught a 17-inning game, which is a heck of a long time. Particularly when playing when Claude played, there was almost no, there was a chest protector and mitt and a fake mask, nothing else. So in 1904, starting White Sox catcher Billy Sullivan goes down with what the paper called an undisclosed injury. But Claude is on the end of the bench, so he gets called pressed into action. And Claude suffered the same injury as Billy. That undisclosed injury, he sticks a cup in his jock strap and becomes the first baseball player in Major League history to wear a protected cup during a baseball game. And so my wife, I'll credit her for this. She was asking me about this. She's like, so 1904 is when the cup was widely utilized. I'm like, well, it's when it was first utilized. She's like, when was the baseball helmet widely utilized? It wasn't required for several more decades. So you kind of get a good sense of where priorities lie. I would be remiss not to mention that Claude was a longtime Wayne County resident. He died here in Richmond. He was buried in Earlham College. So we have yet another really neat tie. So what we're not touching on, though, is Major League Baseball's spotty history when it comes to, well, let's just talk. I created this timeline to kind of break it down. This is my incredibly simple timeline of Major League Baseball's racial history from 1860 to 1960. So why are these polls chosen? Well, I guess very simply, 1860 is the year before the American Civil War. 1960 is 1960, and that is even 100 years. But 1860, think about it this way: everyone's farming. Most people are farmers, I should say. Pardon me. So then, when the Civil War starts in 1861, all of a sudden you have all of these mostly men, but of course women served the American Civil War as well, that are used to working sun up to sundown. But all of a sudden, they're cooped up in an army camp, just staring at each other all day, trying to figure out things to do. We've been playing cards for so long, I imagine. So baseball at this time actually widely catches fire amongst Civil War camps. 1960 is chosen because it's not until 1959 that the final Major League Baseball team integrates. That is, of course, the Boston Red Sox. It took them 12 years after Jackie Robinson integrated baseball before they signed a man named Pumpsie Green. So yes, you have this 100-year span. So let's fill in some dates. 1876, the National League is founded. Yes, that's actually the still National League, the same one that plays today. Now, my guess is some of you may know who this is, but perhaps most of you don't. This is a gentleman named Moses Fleetwood Walker. Please call him Fleet. He was a catcher for the Toledo Blue Stockings of the American Association in 1884. He was, before Jackie Robinson, the last black baseball player at the Major League ranks, which that was interrupted by this man. So whereas Fleet Walker has been often forgotten in history, this gentleman, again with the well-groomed mustache, he has been immortalized. This is Cap Anson. He is a Baseball Hall of Famer and perhaps the best, most famous baseball player of the whole 19th century. He is also the player who publicly refused to play against black players. And soon his sentiment, again, as the most famous baseball player, perhaps of the 19th century, spread across all major leagues. Within a year, it's spread across all minor leagues. And within a very short time from his public, very public, words that I can't repeat, public displays of protest, you're not going to see any black major leaguers for a long time, or minor leaguers. So to boot, to really embolden this, in 1896, you have, of course, the groundbreaking case Plessy v. Ferguson, which not only kind of emboldens this sentiment, but it also makes it very legal. Plessy v. Ferguson is, of course, a separate but equal doctrine. So what baseball is doing at this point wasn't even straight, it was the law of the land. And then in 1947, of course, you have an absolute hero, number 42 himself, Jackie Robinson. But you do have this big swath here, 63 years, in fact, where there are no black baseball players at the major league level, 62 years at the minor league level, because Jackie spent the 46 season in Montreal, the minor league team. So that's why the Negro Leagues existed. I think it's pretty straightforward. They couldn't play at these levels. They simply were not permitted to, whether it be the law of the land or just people's very strong racial biases. Well, why Richmond? So Negro League teams would not only play each other in their regularly scheduled league games, Kansas City Monarchs play the Homestead Grays here, or the Pittsburgh Crawfords play the Cleveland Buckeyes here. They zigzag the country, picking up exhibition games. It's called barnstorming. They play games everywhere against essentially anyone, whoever they could obtain booking, because this was critical in their survival. It would help balance their financial ledgers. So these games would play in Richmond. And like I said, Negro League teams would play other Negro League teams in the area, local amateur or factory teams, semi-pro or even minor league teams. And on occasion, as we saw, other major league teams. So what was the barnstorming life like? Okay, so here's a helpful graph, I think. On August 30th, 1933, the 1933 Pittsburgh Crawfords actually had 6 Hall of Famers on that team. They came to Richmond to play the Dayton Marcos, a game which they won. So I was like thinking, okay, what was their path? What was the Crawfords' path to get to Richmond? Well, they started in Cleveland and played the House of David 2 times, winning 1, losing 1. I was curious about the House of David. They have a very interesting history themselves out of Benton Harbor, Michigan. They played and they were like excellent ball players, but they had beards like down to their belly. So, anyways, from there they drive to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and the Silver Bridges Club, I'm assuming, is probably the best baseball team in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. They made pretty easy light work of them, 14-0. They turn on the next day and drive to Cincinnati, where they lose to the Chicago American Giants, a fellow Negro League team. They turn around, they drive to Dayton. They actually lose to Dayton Destroyer. Anyways, this is probably a very typical 11-day stretch in the life of a barnstorm, where you have 11 days, 6 different cities, 10 games. They won 7 of them while traveling exactly 879 miles. This is, of course, before the interstate system was developed. And oftentimes, travel accommodations were terrible. The Homestead Grays of 1930, perhaps, in my humble opinion, one of the best Negro League teams that was ever assembled, they drove in a fleet of 4 Buicks around. So that was their travel. So again, why Richmond? If you tell your friends you're part of the Negro League Superhighway, they probably won't know what that means. I just made it up but it's very true. The stars, the gold stars, represent where Negro League teams could be found, or barnstorming teams in the case of House of David. So as you can see, we're nestled very centralized. So teams met here consistently for decades to play here. And it was kind of this hidden history for a very, very long time. Well, how consistently would they play here? You might be curious. Between 1957 and 1907 and 1959, there were over 130 confirmed games involving black baseball teams here in Richmond, including the Homestead Grays 6 times, the Kansas City Monarchs 5 times, Chicago American Giants 17 times, and perhaps the biggest, whenever these guys came to town, people showed up. The Indianapolis Clowns, who came here 22 times. So it was about mid-2019. I decided on a well-informed hunch I was going to find every single game here locally that involved a Negro League team. I thought it would make like a really cute Facebook post or whatever, good story to tell my family. And then that's when I discovered there was all these. There's a lot here. And so as I was documenting all the games, by the way, the first one was October 2nd, 1907, which featured a gentleman named John Merida, the Indianapolis ABCs versus the Richmond Quakers. John Merida was born in Spiceland, Indiana. So a lot of folks say, like, okay, Alex, give us an East Central Indiana black baseball hero. This man in absolute spades. He was born in Spicely, Indiana. He began playing for the Spicely Academy in 1895, and he played exclusively on white teams for 10 years. And they wasn't really shy about it. As you can see, this is actually a photograph of him with 4 of his teammates. So, oh, and he played at Earlham too. He played at Earlham a bunch. Played all over this area. But it's interesting because whereas a lot of these guys were at the wrong place at the wrong time, often, he was actually still in the wrong time because he couldn't make the big leagues, but he was in the right place. Spiceland, of course, is a Quaker hub, and it was much, much more inclusive at that time than most rural small towns in Indiana. So they welcomed him with open arms. He was also an excellent catcher, and during the dead ball era of baseball, when bunt, steal, hit slap singles, kind of the technical side of the game, John Merritt was the best power hitter in the entire country. People could not believe how far this man could hit a baseball. And all the papers said for essentially his entire life, which is his life was cut short by spinal meningitis while he was actually playing baseball in Kansas City. It was a consensus that John Merritt would be a national leaguer if not for this race. But all told, after I did all of the games, I said, Alex, you know what you should have done? You should have logged every player that came to Richmond. So I took that list, I started from the beginning, and John Merritt actually, interestingly enough, was batting leadoff for the ABC that day. So he was the very first player in what became a 350 plus player database of every player who's played in Richmond, including 20 members of the Baseball Hall of Fame. Our plaque, unfortunately, I love it, it's outdated. We'll talk about why. When this slide was originally made, there was only 19 Baseball Hall of Famers. We're going to talk about one special one here in a moment. But Josh Gibson, whose jersey I'm wearing today, he came here 3 times. Cool Papa Bell came here no fewer than 3 times. Satchel Paige came here once in 1946. And this gentleman here is named Oscar Charleston, the very best baseball player you probably haven't heard of. He was born in Indianapolis. His nickname was a Hoosier Common. He was a 5-tool player back in the teens and 20s. So he could hit for average, hit for power, he played defense, he ran the bases. And you didn't mess with him either. Like you didn't mess with him. Oscar Charleston once, his team finished a game. And this has been widely reputed either in rural Indiana or rural Florida. When he was leading his team back out on the bus, there was a circle of Ku Klux Klan members around the bus. This is in the 20s when the Klan was pretty much widespread throughout many parts of the country. I guess not most, but many. And Oscar just walked up to one of the Klansmen, plucked his hood off, threw it on the ground, pretty much looked at all the other Klansmen, waited for someone to say something. Nobody said anything. So they just filed onto the bus and said, come on, guys. And so kind of that steely gaze that kind of said, I dare you. But he was here. Bill James, who's a baseball historian, called Oscar Charleston the 3rd best player in baseball. Willie Mays once asked Buck O'Neill, baseball luminary, who we're going to talk about in the next slide, hey, Buck, how good was Oscar Charleston? In my humble opinion, Willie Mays is the best baseball player who's ever graced the earth. Buck O'Neill told Willie Mays that, hey, Willie, Oscar was you before you were you. Yeah, I love that. So the 20th Hall of Famer who appeared in Richmond will be actually in this upcoming class. Buck O'Neill, who, aside from being an excellent ball player, perhaps the gentlest, most kindest human being. If you're curious, you get a good introduction to Buck O'Neill. He's in Ken Burns' Ken Burns baseball. That's a different topic. He's in Ken Burns baseball. He does a fantastic job. He's the soul of baseball. But Buck played here no fewer than 3 times, but likely 5 times. I just couldn't find his name in the papers for 2 other instances between 1946 and 1954. So when you're out at that baseball plaque with all of your friends and associates and colleagues, and you see 19, just make sure you tell them it's 20 now. Maybe we'll get that changed someday. But others who came through, Luke Easter came through twice. He was the 11th player to break baseball's color barrier. Sam the Jet Jethro came through twice. He was the NL Rookie of the Year in 1950, the oldest player to win Rookie of the Year honors. He was 34th. Hank Thompson, who was the hero of the 1954 World Series, even more so than Willie Mays. 1954 series is that famous one that Willie makes that catch like this, catches it, spins around, and dang near throws out a guy at home plate. But Hank Thompson was really the one who was the true hero of that whole series. And then my favorite, Choo Choo Coleman. He was on that 1962 Mets team that was horrendous, but he's just an awesome guy. He came to the Indianapolis Clowns in 1957. Well, all told, half of the first 24 players to break baseball's color barriers after Jackie Robinson came through Richmond with their Negro Leagues team. So this isn't just like, I don't know. When I talk about this, sometimes I feel like, are you making a mountain out of a molehill here, Alex? Like, are you just celebrating this little huge pocket of our history here in Richmond? No, absolutely not. And I think the proof is just strictly in the numbers. So one of the big things that I discovered throughout this whole process was, in fact, two Negro League teams that were from Richmond. The first one was the Richmond Giants. Yes. See the gentleman here in the bottom right-hand corner, that is Oscar Charleston. So Oscar Charleston not only played in Richmond, he also played for Richmond as well. He represented us in 1918. So in the 1918 Richmond Giants have an interesting history. We talk about Exhibition Park, which was built in 1917. They built this park for the Richmond Quakers, which was a minor league team at that time. And so 1917 was also the year when World War I is raging. So a lot of the players started shipping off. All of a sudden, the minor leagues had this terrible player shortage. So Richmond has this brand new park with a team and a league that just folded up shop. And now they're looking at a possibility of a whole summer with an empty ballpark that's brand new. That can't happen. So they contract the Jewel ABCs of Indianapolis. They call them the Richmond Giants, and they become our team. So in 17 games between June and September of 1918, the Giants boast nearly a .650 winning percentage. We have George Bren. Bren might ring a bell. There was a sporting goods store here for a long time. It was Bren's. Same guy. This is him as a much older man. Oscar Charleston was on the team. A guy named Jack Hannibal was on the team. Talk about him. A guy named Connie Day was on the team. Perhaps one of the most flashiest middle infielders in the Negro Leagues. Played on the Richmond Giants. As is Bill the Devil Holland. Nicknamed the Devil because he was very competitive. I about said a choice word. He was very competitive, though. And this is him as a much older man. He debuted as a Giant when he was 17 years old. He went on to strike out the 5th most guys in Negro Leagues history. Made his debut across the street from that marker at Exhibition Park. I'm really excited, particularly about this guy. So someone's asking, where's the uniform? That's actually the New York Black Yankees, who oftentimes use discarded Yankee uniforms. But that's him. He's the All-Star game in 1939, so 21 years after he debuted. So if there's one thing that John Merritt is a big player here for us. But you might be like, I don't know if you noticed this, but I guess not wearing a shirt. I did, in fact. So that's Jack Hannibal. His nickname was the Fighting Portal. He was one of the most prolific boxers in Indiana at this time. Now, with African Americans being shut out of baseball, boxing was one of those few areas in sporting that they could go out and make a living. So not only was he a .435 career hitter in baseball, which is pretty daggone good, he was the welterweight, then middleweight champion of Indiana. So here he is, he's the welterweight champion of Indiana. And then he decides, for the heck of it, I'm gonna put on 13 pounds and become the middleweight champion of Indiana. But he boxed all over the Midwest, including against Jack Blackburn. That name is very important in the boxing circles around this time because Jack, he was a world champion, but then he also trained Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber. So Jack trained fighters until his 1949 death. This is the last photograph I was able to find of him. This is from 1945. So he stayed in the game for a long time. According to his obituary, he was 95 and 5 in the ring. Pretty good. But doesn't stop there. It's not just boxing. It's not just baseball. He's also a football player. So Oh, my goodness. This is the 1925 state champion football team of Indiana. There was no professional football teams in Indiana at this time, so it was all semi-pro. If you look across here, you'll see this blue arrow. That is Jack Hannibal. That is our guy. And he is the only person of color on this entire team. That is noteworthy. So he played guard. And we know it's offensive line. He's offensive line. You can see he's not the biggest dude out here, but he was just scrappy. And then this gentleman here is named Al Feeney. I don't know if they all know the name Coop Rockney. He was quite a guy in Notre Dame. Rocky played equivalent of tight end. Feeney was the center on that same team. And Feeney also became the first Catholic mayor of Indianapolis in 1950. So it's kind of a cool connection. So Feeney, of course, played at Notre Dame and becomes the mayor of Indianapolis, and he coached our man, Jack Hannibal. So I'm very proud that when we put this marker together, Jack Hannibal is in fact publicly commemorated, which by my vantage point is, I think, the first time. On Martin Luther King Jr. Day, I took my 6-year-old daughter, one of them anyways, I got two, Harper and Eleanor, they're both 6. Took my daughter Eleanor though, because we wanted to find some of these guys' final resting places. I had a lot number and a plot number. I was very disturbed, and this is not uncommon, by the way, folks, that Jack Hannibal is buried in an unmarked plot, still to this day. So, fortunately, I had a baseball, my handwriting sucks, but I left him a baseball on his final resting place. So one of my short-term goals is to raise money to get this man a grave marker. But he is commemorated in our town. So Jack Hannibal.
I'm sorry.
Fire away, Bob.
The football, was that an Indianapolis team? I didn't see it. It says JJC. What is that?
Yes, that is, I can't remember who their team sponsor was, but Indianapolis based.
Okay, that's Indianapolis. And then which cemetery is the baseball on?
That is in Crown Hill. Crown Hill Cemetery. So I'm driving up to this place. I'm trying to think who else. Christian Beta spoke. Terrible. I was just there a month and a half ago. I'm driving around. I knew it was big. It's an Indianapolis Cemetery. And couldn't fly. And finally, like, I'm the kind of guy who won't ask for directions. If I can't find anything in the supermarket, I'll walk up and down the aisles. I look at my daughter Eleanor, who had just turned into like an icicle, and she's like kind of over this. I so finally I'm like, okay, we're gonna go to the visitor center. I'll ask where these places are. They're like, oh, it's okay. We get this all the time. People come here and they think they can conquer this place, but most people don't know it's the 3rd largest cemetery in the nation. I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense then. So yes, he and quite a number of others are buried. Yes.
Alex, I was looking back at the map of the team. Is it because you're talking locally, or were there not Negro teams outside of the Midwest?
There sure were.
Okay.
New York, Philadelphia. There were teams, elsewhere. There weren't a whole lot in the South, though the Negro Southern League did sprout in the 30s. But it was like definitely kind of a Midwestern. If you look at the initial inaugural 1920 league, they're almost all based in the Midwest.
So so that was the Negro Leagues, then sorry, I think I'm asking the same question again, but like, did our people ever play in the Northeast or vice versa or any of that?
Oh, I did, like, when you say our people.
Midwesterners.
Yes, no, absolutely, no, of course, I'm picking up what you put down, I just want to make sure. Yeah, absolutely, teams like the Indianapolis ABCs in 1918, for instance, Oscar Charleston left the Giants to go back to the ABCs because they were doing it East Coast. So it's like, this was very common, everybody kind of bounced around like a ping pong ball. And Negro Leagues I use very loosely often. The first formal Negro League wasn't established until 1920. So the teams before that are referred to as Negro League teams, but they weren't necessarily playing. It's kind of parlance, modern parlance for what we would call black, or what we're called Blackball. So in 1940, here's our list. We have the 1918 Richmond Giants. Then we have the 1940, the Richmond Lincoln Giants. So by this time, it's Rydesville, and again known as Municipal Stadium. You're not going to believe this. You know who managed the 1940 Richmond Lincoln Giants? Anyone say yes? terrible. He did. I know he did. I wish I could make out his face, but this gentleman's got his hand on this man's shoulder and that, and I just like to think that's gotta be Coach Jack Hannibal. But the Richmond Lincoln Giants went 7-9-1 during their season. However, they did have one, they did their best, I should say, baseball for their best foe, which was the Indianapolis Crawfords. They played the Indianapolis Crawfords at Richmond Field in Indianapolis. The Crawfords were managed by Oscar Charleston. And in one single day, they had to go against, these are the two pitchers they had to go against. They went against John Wright. His nickname was Needle Nose. So he was a really, I recognize this guy, this guy, Robinson. So this is in 1946. This is the year before Jackie breaks the color barrier. Most people don't know that Jackie, the year before Jackie broke the color barrier, he played in the minor leagues up north, Montreal. They figured the racial, attitudes towards race. What they brought along John Wright to help him acclimate, serve as a roommate. They didn't want him to go completely by himself. So John Wright was the second black player in the minor leagues. So our humble Richmond Lincoln Giants not only have to face the guy who will become the second black minor leaguer, and they got to face Connie Cannonball Johnson in game 2. Who eventually broke in with the White Sox and became a prolific pitcher for the Baltimore Orioles. So we lost the first game 11-6. We actually tied Connie 2-2. So not too bad, all things considered. All right, I have a couple more quick stories, and then we kind of open it up. We got to talk about this home run. So on August 6th, 1936, Municipal Stadium in Prague officially opens. When that field was first, everyone knows where Peacock Road is. The former fence used to butt up right next to Peacock Road, considerably longer than it did. So it took 639 days for somebody to plug one over that left field fence. 639 days, because it was impossibly far. Like, let's just call it what it is. But it was, of course, fittingly, the most prodigious home run in Richmond history was hit by perhaps the most prodigious home run hitter in baseball history, and that is Josh Gibson. Again, the Black Babe Ruth, or some people like to call Babe Ruth the White Josh Gibson. Gibson goes 4 for 6, hitting for the Cycle in this crazy 13-12 game against the Indianapolis Sterlings, who were Indiana's semi-pro champions that year. But he becomes the first player ever to hit a home run over the left field fence, which is 412 feet down the line. So that's 412 feet down the line. That's just baseball fields like this. So it's very, very long, very quickly. That's not even the most crazy part of the story. It took over 3,300 days for someone to do it again. In 1947, Bob Berry of the Richmond Roses, minor league team, he hit the first home run over left field fence since 1938, Gibson's home run. And according to the paper, the left field fence was 400 feet down the line. So you really did it. But of course, sadly, this was actually a few months after Josh Gibson himself died. He died at a very young age. He was 35 years old. Died of brain damage. So, yeah, we'll talk about a life that was taken very, very early in its prime. So, again, when we're thinking about home runs in Richmond history, Josh Gibson had the biggest blast. I talked about the Indianapolis Clowns. This man right here was the absolute toast of the town every time he came. His name was Reese Tatum. Now, he also, Goose. He was the first international sports superstar. Not only did he play for the Indianapolis Clowns of the Negro American League, but he was also probably the first famous, world famous Harlem Globetrotter. He was 6'6", but he had a 7'2" wingspan, which he was very proud of. But this is the guy who brought the fans to the stands. He was very animated, and he played just very entertaining brand of obviously basketball. He was an excellent all-star baseball player, but he just played with so much flair. He came to Richmond, a bunch of the Harlem Globetrotters, as well as the Indianapolis Clowns. And in 2011, Basketball righted one of their long oversights and inducted him into the Basketball Hall of Fame. So Goose Tatum. Now, August 1st, 1946, we have another special guest coming to Richmond. This is actually the second time he came to Richmond. He came once in the earlier 40s with the Harlem Globetrotters, but Jesse Owens was he owned a Negro League team. And Jesse Owens, unfortunately, okay, actually, here's a trick question. Jesse Owens won all those gold medals in the 36 Olympics. Does anyone know who got second to Jesse in virtually every single event? All, of course, while you don't fit. Steven. You're close.
Yeah.
Mac Robinson.
Yeah.
Jackie's.
Oh, wow.
So, unfortunately, they lived in an era where Jesse had to come home and race horses and do other exhibitions of speed. Mac came home and was a custodian. So, unfortunately, they probably didn't get to do, especially Mac, didn't get to do it, and Owens really had to hustle to make a living after he was. But so we had 2,700 people show up at this game between the Indianapolis Clowns, so Bruce Tatum's outfit, and the Seattle Steelheads, which was a team that Jesse Owens actually owned. He owned a stake in the West Coast Negro Baseball Association. So Jesse Owens, and then perhaps the very best conglomeration of talent came to Richmond on August 10, 1946, and that was the Bob Feller All-Stars versus the Satchel Paige All-Stars. So we had some very entrepreneurial baseball players who Feller's team was all white, Paige's team was all black, and they played each other. Just still, like, I can't wrap my head around, even to this day. Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, Municipal Stadium in Cleveland, Comiskey Park in Chicago, Crosley Field in Cincinnati, Yankee Stadium. These are pro base. These are big places. And beautiful field in Baltimore. And even like Hudson Field over in Dayton, like kind of a head scratcher. But 2 days later, they were in Richmond. So this is still as cool as it is, and it's still just so random that they came here. But Feller's All-Stars had 3 Hall of Famers, so Bob Feller himself, Phil Rizzuto, who was the little shortstop for the Yankees for so long, and Bob Lemon. 66 All-Star game appearances on the Feller All-Star side. On the Page All-Star side, you had 3 Hall of Famers, including Mr. Page himself, the best pitcher in baseball history, Hilton Smith, who was another pitcher, who really conducted. And then 5 of Page's guys would actually end up breaking baseball's color barrier, and 3 more would sign minor league contracts. This was an incredible conglomeration of talent. So that was mere months actually before integration, because on April 15th of the following year, Jackie closed the doors open. He actually back up. He blows the doors open, but integration is actually a very slow process. It took about took 5 seasons to get 25 big league black baseball players. Excuse me. So there's a price of progress. Excuse me. So within a few years of integration, most of the Negro League teams are shut. And every time these guys are plucked from these Negro League teams, not every big league owner is actually compensating these teams. Jackie was signed from the Monarchs. Branch Rickey, for as much good as he did, he never compensated Negro League teams to be plucked players. He just did it. And that's because he didn't view Negro League teams as viable. It's really that simple. So Bill Beck of the Cleveland Indians at the time, he did. He paid the Newark Eagles for Larry Doby. He paid the Homestead Grace for Lucas. But it's just kind of an interesting quirk, something that I picked up. So 39 days after Jackie debuts, Cool Papa Bell made his final appearance in Richmond with a team called the Detroit Senators. This is like Cool Papa's one of the best baseball players in baseball. The Detroit Senators are a 4th-grade Negro League team. And only 350 people show up. This is how quickly these things really unravel. Oh, you're kidding me. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm like spoken too much. Thanks for that. So, however, something cool did happen on June 28, 1954. And that's that we hosted all 3 of the women who played professional baseball in the Negro Leagues. Miss Toni Stone, Peanut Johnson, and Connie Morgan. These three played, Toni Stone broke in 1953 with the Indianapolis Clowns. The following year, she was traded to the Monarchs, and Johnson and Morgan came in. So some people think like, well, why didn't they play in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, which was a thing at that time? This actually, they're doing research on this now, and this anecdote just came out from kidding last week, and I was gleeful. Peanut Johnson went to South Bend to try out for the Blue Sox, and she was allegedly the best player at the trial. So she found a home in the Negro Leagues with the Indianapolis Clowns. She's fantastic. She was fantastic. All three were. Toni Stone was a second baseman pitcher. She broke in first, and the Clowns weren't very nice to her, actually. She oftentimes was not permitted to stay in the team hotel with the rest of the team. And so she actually established this network of brothels that she could stay in. She knew she could go and actually be safe and stay there. And she would sew extra padding in her uniform because people would try to spike her or throw the ball at her, like, you know, extremely hard, even if it was just say some foul line, and they'd whip the ball at her. And yeah, like I said, she often was not permitted to stay in the team hotel. So again, she'd stay at brothels, and then the sex workers would actually come out to the game and support her, which is pretty heck-on cool. She had like this match of fans. But they all took the field together on June 28, 1954, which is a game that is also very noteworthy because this, if you went to that particular game and you bought a program, this is what it would look like. But as you can see, the two managers of the team, Buck O'Neill and Oscar Charleston, until very recently, this was not the case until Buck O'Neill went in, but this was the only time in Richmond baseball history that both teams were managed by a Hall of Fame. And then the Hoosier Comet himself, Oscar Charleston, died less than 100 days after managing that final game with the Monarchs. The Clowns would come back, the Monarchs would in Richmond. So, sweet. Somewhat timely. Oh no, this whole time I thought I was. Okay. So we're up to the top of the hour. But thank you all very much. I appreciate everyone coming out, everyone's time. Hopefully this was enlightening. Is there any questions?
Where's that plaque again? I'm sorry, Ms. Bree said it was.
All good. We're gonna hit fast, rewind. The plaque. Look at that. That's fine. The plaque is. So this road right here, that's the main entrance to the park. So right here is like the Rose Garden. So if you're going in the main entrance of the park, they're right off 40. You can't miss it, but you can't ignore it. So it's right where that star is.
So you're saying park, I thought you meant the baseball.
Oh,
You mean
yes.
the park. Okay,
Yes.
gotcha.
All right, picture on the left. It
Yes.
looks like, I guess on the north side of the road, there's buildings there, or what are we looking at?
Oh, right here? Or-
Above the road.
That's a really good question.
You know, was that was part of the park?
Yeah.
But there's not, there was a zoo in Glen Miller?
There was a zoo. I know there was a zoo in Glen Miller, but I'm not sure when. When and where on that.
It was up through the 90s, I believe. I don't know the exact year. I know it was all through the 80s, and I'm sure it went into the early 90s at least.
Wow. I'll be. Yeah, but I'm not sure what those are. But again, make sure whenever you see this marker, you tell your friends we got 20 Hall of Fame.
Was that Route 40 then?
This is 40, yes. I mean, okay, so just to acclimate ourselves, you can kind of see them a little bit, they're a little blurry. There's like billboards here. And it's woods. You would never guess there was this huge baseball park there. So yeah, that's the like Rose Garden, the entrance to the park, the main one. So like Madonna, the trail would be like kind of over here. But these are all billboards here. Very unassuming. Yes, there.
You said your book is for sale somewhere. Is that true?
I do. If anyone would like, I mean, I'll take an IOU because this wasn't a. If anyone is interested in a copy of this book, so I actually did two. I was kind of busy with 2020. But not only did I did this, which has all the history of everything that we've talked about, but with the exception of the early 1860 and 70 baseball. My history starts in the early 1880s here. But I also did a little small work on John Mayer. So if you're interested in one of these, I have plenty. Also, a bunch of stuff to look at. I've got some of the teams who play here, and also some of the cards of the guys who played here. And then also the current owner of the Indianapolis Clowns, because the Indianapolis Clowns actually survived until the late 80s, which is absolutely wild. They were the last of the barnstorming teams. I befriended their owner, who was a really nice guy. Nice enough that he sent me this. This is actually one of the last scorecards they ever produced in the 80s. So long after the demise of the Negro Leagues, but still a really cool memento. But I want to thank everybody for coming out. Hopefully this was interesting. You know what? That's my mother-in-law. She's awful kind to me, and she actually got this for my birthday a couple of years ago. I know. Actually, I was gonna say, Brad, you got it.
I got all these my 3 years, one of them. You can go online with all of them. Just go online and you can get all of them. They got all different kinds on their web. I got pretty much all of them on it, and on this side over here, all the baseball.
Yeah, it's amazing what you find.
I know you're a big fan of Easter. You got a story or two on Easter to talk about.
Yes, so I do love Luke Easter. He came to Richmond twice in 1946 as a member of the Cincinnati Crescents. He was the 11th player to break baseball's color barrier. Perhaps one of the things about Luke Easter is when he broke in with the Indians in 1949, and really, if you look at the back of all of the baseball cards, it will tell you that his birthday is August 4th, 1921. However, he was actually born on August 4th, 1915. In order to get to the major leagues, he felt like he had to make himself look like a younger prospect. So I think most people in the stadium thought he was, this 28-year-old rookie. But really, he was a 34-year-old man. And he stuck around baseball till the mid-60s. But what's even crazier about him is he became one of the biggest power hitters of the early 50s in baseball. But he spent the entire war, not having played baseball, he spent it in a chemical factory. And he spent it in a naval shipyard. It was so much to pick up a bat. And breaks into the Negro Leagues and becomes one of the most feared sluggers. And so it just makes you wonder, if you would have gotten equal shot, what would have happened to him? How would he have? I did a bit of a research project on Luke Easter. If you were to count minor league, major league, Negro League, semi-pro, he hit over 700 home runs. So
for a contemporary play, you could be like Willie McCovey.
You could definitely say that because he was, yes, for a modern day player, he didn't strike out as much as this guy, but nobody strikes out then as much as they do now. Aaron Judge, outfielder for the Yankees, who stands about 6'8", 285 pounds. Easter stood 6'5", 6'40", which was enormous in the 1950s. Enormous. Of course.
Have you been to the Kansas City Negro Hall of Fame? There you go.
I know. I think I can get two of them on board of a road trip. This is the third kid. It's my third kid. She probably look at me kind of funny. But I hope to soon. I know a couple of the folks who work there, including their executive director. And yeah, he actually retweeted our marker when our marker went in. So he's very aware that we're doing some good work over here in Richmond. He's very selfless. He worked. Buck O'Neill was also famous speaking of, he founded the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City. And Bob Kendrick, who is the current executive director of that museum, he showed up as an intern one day. He meets Buck there. He meets another guy named Monty Irvin, who was another baseball player in the 40s and 50s. And he's like, I'm here to intern at the museum. And they're like, okay, here it is. And they open it up and it's a closet, just full of memorabilia. And so, but now they've got a full-fledged museum, and it's amazing. All right, I won't hold you anymore because we keep going, but I do appreciate it. Thank you, folks. Thank you.